Golden afternoon light stretched across the rows of oak chairs. The soft melody of a piano blended with the faint scent of ocean salt. Everything was perfect, precisely like the architectural blueprints he used to draw. Marcus quietly tightened his silk tie. Then, a voice broke through the air. It did not come from the altar.
Marcus!
At the very back of the aisle, a silhouette stood completely still, her face obscured by the blinding glare of the sun. For a second, she did not move. Then, she stepped forward, leaving the bright halo behind. A navy blue dress, brown hair pulled back in a rush. Elena. The guests continued chatting. The piano music did not stop. However, his chest constricted. The comforting warmth of the afternoon vanished. In its place came the harsh, blinding white of fluorescent hospital lights and the agonizing, rhythmic beep of ventilators.
Do not wait for me.
Her voice returned, as clear as if it had never vanished for 5 years. Marcus stood paralyzed, his present shattering into fragments of memory. Why now? Why here? Why exactly when he was about to give a ring to another woman? Around him, the ceremony carried on untouched. Champagne glasses clinked somewhere in the background. Everything remained perfectly in place. Except for him. Something fundamental had already shifted, and there was absolutely no way to undo it. Seattle was drowning in rain, and the ICU felt just as merciless. Elena stood near the hospital's glass doors, staring at her own reflection as if she barely recognized it. Her scrubs were wrinkled. Her hands still shook. 3 hours earlier, in the chaos of an overcrowded shift, she had miscalculated a medication dose. The patient survived, but for 10 terrible minutes, he could not breathe, and the monitors screamed around her. He lived, but something inside Elena did not. That night was not the first time she had made a mistake. It was just the first time she could no longer convince herself it wouldn't happen again. For weeks, sleep had come in fragments, 30 minutes here, an hour there, never enough to feel real. Her thoughts blurred at the edges. Names slipped. Numbers took longer to make sense. She had started double-checking everything, then triple-checking. And still, it wasn't enough. Standing there, under the fluorescent lights, she realized something that terrified her more than the mistake itself. She was no longer sure she could trust her own hands. Before everything fell apart, their story did not begin gently. It began on a night that was already going wrong. Marcus first saw Elena in the emergency entrance of the hospital, her voice sharp, controlled, and barely holding together. She was arguing with a senior doctor, her hands shaking, her eyes red from exhaustion. "I followed protocol," she said, her voice tight. "You weren't there." The doctor dismissed her with a tired wave and walked away. Elena stood there for a second, completely still, then turned, walked outside, and sat down hard on the curb, like her body had finally given up pretending. That was where Marcus found her. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had come to deliver revised plans for a renovation project and got lost in a building that smelled like antiseptic and sleepless nights. He saw her drop her coffee without noticing. The lid popped open, dark liquid spilling across the pavement. She didn't react. Marcus picked up the cup, threw it away, and silently handed her the one he had just bought for himself. She looked at it like she didn't understand the gesture. "You look like you need it more than I do," he said. That was the first thing he ever said to her. She let out a quiet, humorless laugh, and for the first time that night, her shoulders dropped slightly. They didn't exchange numbers that day. They didn't even say goodbye properly. But Marcus came back the next evening. And the evening after that? Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she just sat beside him, too tired to pretend she was okay. Their relationship didn't grow from romance. It grew from survival. It grew in the spaces between exhaustion and patience, but also in the small, ordinary moments they never thought to remember. Marcus learned to wait outside the hospital without texting, knowing she might be too tired to reply. Elena learned the rhythm of his silence, the way he showed care through actions instead of words. Some nights, she would fall asleep mid-sentence on his couch, still in her scrubs, her head resting against his shoulder. He never woke her. He would just sit there, unmoving, as if protecting that moment mattered more than anything else. Other nights were lighter. She would show up at his place half awake and insist on cooking, only to forget what she was doing halfway through and start laughing at herself. Once, she burned an entire pan of pasta and blamed the stove like it had personally betrayed her. Marcus laughed so hard he had to sit down, and she threw a kitchen towel at him without any real aim. Sometimes they didn't talk about anything important at all. Just late-night walks, hands brushing, the city quieter than usual, as if it had decided to leave them alone for a while. He once spent an entire weekend redesigning a window in his plans because she mentioned, casually, that she missed morning light. She teased him for it, called him obsessive. But she never forgot. They didn't talk about forever often. They didn't need to. It lived in the way he waited, and in the way she stayed, even when she was already too tired to hold herself together. But somewhere along the way, exhaustion stopped being something she could recover from and became something she carried into everything. There were nights she didn't remember driving to his place. Mornings she woke up still in her shoes, her phone full of messages she didn't recall reading. Once, she fell asleep while boiling water and woke up to the smell of something burning. Marcus never made a big deal out of it. He just stayed closer after that. But it was his gentleness and her psychological disorder that made her feel terrible about herself. She started pulling away in ways she couldn't explain, not because she loved him less, but because being around him made her more aware of what she was becoming. Marcus saw her fading and tried to hold on tighter. Elena felt it and began to panic. Because the more he stayed, the more certain she became of one thing. If she didn't leave first, she would eventually break him too. That fateful night finally arrived. When Elena stepped into the freezing hospital parking lot, Marcus was waiting beneath a flickering street lamp. He held a black umbrella in one hand and a leather drafting tube in the other, as if he had come straight from work without thinking twice. Marcus believed broken things could be repaired, buildings, plans, people. He took one look at her face, stepped closer, and pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket. "Elena," he said softly, shielding her from the rain, "you can't keep doing this alone. Marry me. We'll leave. We'll start over. I'll take care of you." The diamond caught the streetlight. For a second, it looked like hope. To Elena, it felt like weight. She looked at his steady hands and understood something unbearable. She had nothing left to offer him except damage. If she stayed, she would only drag him deeper into the darkness she was already drowning in. Her breathing turned ragged. Before he could slide the ring onto her finger, she lunged forward and snatched the leather tube from his grip. She pulled out the thick parchment inside, his master blueprint, the career-defining project he had spent 6 months perfecting. "Elena, what are you doing?" he asked, shock replacing the hope in his eyes. She did not answer. With shaking, ruthless hands, she ripped the heavy paper directly down the middle. Then she tore it again, letting the ruined pieces fall into the muddy puddles at their feet. The intricate ink lines immediately began to bleed into the dirty water. Marcus stared at the destroyed pages, completely paralyzed. "Stop trying to fix me," Elena whispered, stepping back into the freezing rain. Her voice was cold, completely devoid of the woman he loved. "Your kindness is a poison to me right now. Do not wait for a walking corpse." She turned and walked into the dark, leaving him alone in the storm. Miles apart, the relentless Seattle rain swallowed them in different ways. Elena sat curled in the corner of a cold porcelain bathtub, still in her damp scrubs, her coat clinging to her shoulders. The lights were off. She hadn't even turned on the water, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, as if she were trying to hold herself together. At first, No sound came out. Then the sobs hit uneven, uncontrollable, breaking through the silence she had tried to keep. She wasn't just crying for what she had ended. She was crying for the part of herself she no longer recognized. Across the city, Marcus didn't cry. He sat at his drafting desk, the torn blueprint spread out in front of him. His hands moved slowly, trying to piece the fragments back together, line by line. He didn't know what he was rebuilding, only that he couldn't leave it broken. Elena never knew what she had destroyed. It wasn't a project. It was the home he had designed for them, the morning light she loved, the quiet corner she would read in, the porch where they were supposed to grow old. Now it existed only in pieces, slipping apart in his hands. Elena left Seattle soon after. She didn't say goodbye. She just disappeared into a small coastal town in Oregon, chasing a kind of silence she hoped might quiet her mind. For a while, it almost worked. Then, 2 months later, everything changed. She was pregnant. For a brief, fragile moment, she thought about going back, about telling him, about undoing everything. But her body, worn thin by exhaustion and years of pushing past its limits, couldn't carry it. She lost the baby before she ever made the call. The pain passed. The guilt didn't. Lying in a quiet clinic room, Elena understood something she couldn't unlearn. She hadn't just left Marcus. She believed she had failed the one life she was supposed to protect. After that, going back was no longer an option. While Elena buried her grief on the coast, Marcus built a life that felt hollow but stable. He worked, he designed, he kept moving. Not because he had healed, but because standing still felt worse. Marcus met Sarah at a hospital charity event he almost didn't attend. He had planned to leave early, but then she sat down across from him. "You knew my sister," she said, her voice calm but direct. Marcus looked up, caught off guard. "Elena took care of her," Sarah continued. "She said your name once." That was the first time anyone had spoken about Elena out loud in months. Marcus didn't know what to say, so he didn't. And strangely, Sarah didn't seem to need him to. They talked in fragments that night, about hospitals, about long nights, about the quiet exhaustion that never really leaves. There was no spark, no sudden shift, just a kind of recognition like two people who had both seen something they couldn't fully explain. After that, they kept running into each other. Coffee that lasted longer than expected, walks that didn't need a destination, conversations that paused without becoming uncomfortable. Sarah never asked him to explain the past. She noticed it instead. The way he went quiet when it rained, the way his eyes drifted when someone mentioned the ICU. She didn't try to replace any of it. She just stayed. Not loudly, not urgently, just consistently. And over time, something shifted. Not a sudden healing, not a clean beginning, but a slow, careful rebuilding. Marcus found himself speaking again, little by little, laughing without noticing, sitting in silence that no longer felt like something he had to endure. He never stopped remembering Elena, and Sarah never asked him to. She stood beside that memory instead, not competing with it, not erasing it, but quietly proving that life could continue even with something unfinished still inside it. The wedding was a masterpiece of elegance, held on a sweeping, manicured estate overlooking the Puget Sound. White floral arrangements cascaded down the aisles, and a string quartet played a hauntingly beautiful melody that drifted through the cool afternoon breeze. Elena stood at the very back of the venue, half hidden behind a massive stone pillar. She wore a simple navy blue dress, desperately trying to blend into the shadows. She had convinced herself she only came to say a silent goodbye, to finally close the darkest chapter of her life. She thought she was completely invisible. She was wrong. Sarah had seen her the moment she arrived. Sarah had always known about Elena, the nurse Marcus never fully stopped carrying inside him. She had seen it in the quiet pauses, in the look on his face whenever rain hit the city, in the parts of him that still belonged to a story he never finished. That was why Sarah had sent the invitation herself. Not to humiliate Elena, not to create a scene, but because she refused to begin a marriage while the past was still standing at the door. At the altar, the golden afternoon sun bathed the couple in a warm, cinematic glow. The priest spoke of enduring love, unshakable commitment, and leaving the past behind to forge a new future. Marcus looked handsome, steady, and resolute. He held Sarah's hands gently, ready to recite the vows he had meticulously memorized. The guests sat in absolute silence, completely captivated by the picture-perfect scene. "May we have the rings?" the priest asked, his voice echoing across the quiet green lawn. Marcus reached into his tailored suit pocket. However, before he could pull out the small velvet box, Sarah gently pulled her hands away from his firm grasp. The sudden, unexpected movement sent a visible ripple of confusion through the front rows. Marcus frowned, his steady composure instantly slipping into a brief moment of panic. "Sarah, what is wrong?" he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Sarah did not look angry. She looked profoundly calm and fiercely determined. She reached out and touched his cheek, her eyes filled with a sad, resolute wisdom. "I cannot accept that ring, Marcus, not until you are truly ready to give it to me," Sarah said softly, yet her voice was clear enough for the closest guests to hear. She slowly turned him around by his shoulders, pointing directly toward the heavy stone pillar at the back of the estate. "Look at the last row, Marcus," she commanded gently. "Your past is standing right there. You need to make your final choice right now, in front of God and everyone here, before we take another step forward." Marcus turned his head, and the entire world stopped. For a moment, no one reacted. The music had already stopped. What remained was a strange, suspended quiet, not silence, but something heavier. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure where to look. Some turned toward the back. Others kept their eyes fixed on the altar, as if nothing had changed. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She simply turned to the priest and gave a small, composed nod. "May we have a few minutes?" It wasn't a request that invited refusal. "Marcus, come with me," she whispered, taking his numb hand. She then gestured toward Elena, her gaze firm but completely devoid of malice. Elena's first instinct was to turn and run back to the parking lot, but her legs refused to move. She knew she owed them this final closure. Minutes later, the heavy oak door of the private bridal suite clicked shut, instantly muffling the frantic murmurs of the crowd outside. The room smelled of fresh lilies and heavy, suffocating tension. Sarah let go of Marcus's hand, giving him space, but she did not leave the room. She stood quietly by the window, her presence acting as a steady, grounding anchor. Marcus looked at Elena, his face pale and strained. He was no longer the desperate, heartbroken man from 5 years ago. He was a groom whose wedding had just been abruptly halted. Elena pressed her back against it, pale and unsteady. "I didn't come here to stop this," she said. "I was in Seattle to sign paperwork for my house. I only wanted to see you once from a distance and then leave." Marcus stared at her, his voice low and controlled. "Then why did you disappear like that? I spent 2 years thinking I had pushed you over the edge. I just need to know why." Sarah stood by the window, quiet but unwavering. "Leaving explains part of it," she said gently, "but not the silence. He tried to find you. He thought you might be dead. What were you so ashamed of?" Elena's face crumpled. "I almost called you," she whispered to Marcus. 3 months after I left, I was going to come home." He took a step closer. "So why didn't you?" Elena shut her eyes. "Because I woke up in a clinic in Oregon, and everything had changed." Marcus frowned. "What happened?" Her lips trembled before the words finally came out.
I lost baby.
"I didn't know I was pregnant when I left," she said, her voice breaking. "When I found out, I wanted to tell you. But then it was gone, and I couldn't face you after that." Marcus stumbled back as if the floor had shifted beneath him. He sat down hard on the edge of the sofa, one hand covering his mouth. The grief that hit him was too large for anger, too late for repair. When he looked up again, his eyes were red. "You decided that for me," he said hoarsely. "You let me mourn a breakup while you mourned our child." "I was drowning, Marcus," she wept quietly, her hands covering her face. "I couldn't drag you under with me, not after everything I had already done to you." Marcus stood up, the instinct to protect Elena rising in him before he could stop it. For years, he had been the one who caught her when she broke, the one who stayed. Now, looking at her trembling shoulders, that instinct returned with a force that almost erased everything else. He wanted to cross the room, pull her close, forgive her, and finally grieve the life they had lost together. For a moment, the present blurred. There was only Elena, the hospital, and the echo of a future that never happened. He took a step forward. Then he felt movement behind him. Sarah stood. She didn't reach for him. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, steady and quiet, her presence impossible to ignore. Marcus turned, and reality came back all at once. This was the woman who had stayed when he was broken, who had rebuilt a life with him piece by piece. She had never asked him to forget, only to choose. Marcus stopped. His breath caught as the weight of it settled in. If he went to Elena, he would be honoring a past filled with love and loss, but destroying the woman who had helped him survive it. If he stayed, he would be choosing the life he had built, while leaving Elena to carry her guilt alone. The room fell silent around him. Marcus looked from Elena to Sarah, unable to move, realizing that whatever he chose, someone he loved would walk away shattered. The suffocating silence in the bridal suite shattered when a violent pounding hit the door. It burst open, and Liam stumbled in, pale and breathless. "Marcus, Sarah, someone collapsed. It's Uncle Richard. I think it's his heart." The emotional tension in the room vanished instantly. Marcus and Sarah froze, still processing, but Elena moved without hesitation. The fragile, broken woman was gone. In her place stood a trained ICU nurse. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice sharp and steady. She ran before anyone could answer. Marcus and Sarah followed as she pushed through the panicked crowd. Guests parted around them, whispers rising. Richard lay on the grass, his face gray, lips blue, completely still. Elena dropped to her knees, pressing 2 fingers to his neck. "No pulse," she said. "He's in cardiac arrest." She began compressions immediately, fast and precise. "Call 911. Tell them we need advanced life support." "Liam AED now." Her dress soaked into the grass, her arms strained with effort, but her rhythm never broke. She counted under her breath, steady, relentless. Marcus stood frozen a few steps away. The noise of the crowd faded, the world narrowing to Elena alone. Sweat clung to her face, her hair coming loose, her movements raw and focused. She didn't hesitate. She didn't falter. She just fought. With every compression, she dragged his uncle back from the edge of death, using nothing but strength and skill. And as Marcus watched, something inside him shifted. The resentment he had carried for 5 years began to crack. He saw her clearly, really saw her for the first time in years. Not the woman who left, not the one who broke him, but the one who had given everything she had to save others, even when it cost her everything else. She was exhausted, scarred, and still standing. In that moment, Marcus understood the truth he had been avoiding. Elena had never stopped being strong. She had simply collapsed under the weight of carrying too much alone. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind a heavy, exhausted silence over the estate. The crisis was over. When paramedics loaded Uncle Richard into the ambulance, he had a pulse, thanks to Elena's relentless compressions. Guests lingered in uneasy clusters, whispering as the tension slowly drained from the afternoon. Elena stood near the edge of the grass, drained and unsteady. The adrenaline was leaving her body, replaced by a dull ache in her bones. Her dress was streaked with mud, her hands still shaking as she stared at them, as if they belonged to someone else. Footsteps approached behind her. Marcus stopped a few feet away, his jacket gone, his tie loosened. The anger that once filled him had been replaced by something quieter, heavier. The distance between them felt impossible to cross. "They said he'll make it," Marcus said, his voice rough. "If you hadn't started when you did, he wouldn't have survived." Elena nodded faintly. "He'll need treatment," she said, "but he has a chance." Marcus stepped closer, careful, as if the moment might break. "Thank you," he said softly. "And I'm sorry. For everything. For pushing you. For not understanding. For the child. I should have found you." He looked toward the empty altar, then back at her. "I can't stand there and pretend this doesn't matter," he said. "I'll stop it. We can leave. We can try again." The words hung between them. Once, they would have meant everything. Elena closed her eyes, then shook her head. She stepped back, quiet but firm. "Don't," she said, her voice unsteady but clear. "Don't destroy her life because you feel guilty about mine. This won't bring anything back. It will only hurt someone else." Marcus swallowed, his eyes filling. "I loved you," he said. "I know," Elena replied. "I loved you too, but love doesn't always survive the timing. We missed it." She glanced toward Sarah, who stood at a distance, watching, waiting without forcing anything. "She stayed," Elena said softly. "She helped you build something real. I can't ask you to lose that just because I'm here now." Marcus tried to speak, but stopped. The truth settled between them, heavy and undeniable. Elena gave a small, tired smile. "We loved each other," she said, "just not at the right time. I'm not your future, Marcus. I'm only part of your past." The wind moved softly across the lawn, carrying the distant echo of voices returning to the ceremony. Somewhere, chairs shifted, music resumed, and life as if nothing had changed. Marcus stood there, caught between what had been and what still waited for him. His chest felt tight, his thoughts unsteady, as if the ground itself might give way. He looked at Elena, seeing the exhaustion in her face, the quiet acceptance in her eyes. She was no longer asking anything from him. That was what made it harder. Then he turned toward Sarah. She hadn't moved. She stood with the same calm patience, giving him space, trusting him to decide without pressure. In that silence, Marcus understood something he had been avoiding. Love was not only about what you felt. It was about what you chose to protect and what you were willing to leave behind. He took a slow breath, letting it steady him. The past was still there, still real, still painful, but it was no longer the place he could live. When he looked back at Elena, there was no anger left, only a quiet understanding. What they had mattered. What they lost would always matter. But it was over. Elena seemed to understand without words. She gave a small nod, as if releasing him from something he had carried for too long. For the first time, Marcus felt the weight shift, not disappear, but change, becoming something he could finally carry forward without breaking. And with that, he turned away. The cool afternoon breeze moved gently across the lawn, easing the weight that had lingered for years. Marcus looked at Elena for a long moment. He didn't argue. He simply nodded, a quiet acceptance passing between them. He understood now that holding onto the past would only damage what still stood in front of him. Then he turned and walked back toward Sarah. The guests slowly returned to their seats as the music resumed. When Marcus reached the altar, he took Sarah's hands. This time, his grip was steady and certain. Not hesitant, not divided. When he kissed her, it was not out of escape, but choice. Across the city, Elena sat alone in an airport terminal, waiting for her flight. Rain tapped softly against the windows as the skyline faded into the evening. She had come to Seattle carrying years of guilt. Now, she felt something lighter, still fragile, but no longer crushing. There was no miracle, no second chance waiting at the end of the story. Only the quiet truth that some things cannot be undone, only understood. They had survived what broke them, and that would have to be enough. On the plane, Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a worn notebook. For years, it had held the names of people she could not save, the mistakes she could not forget, and the life she had lost. She opened to a blank page and paused. Then, instead of writing an apology or a goodbye, she wrote a single name, Richard. She stared at it for a long moment, her hand finally steady. For the first time in years, the list no longer felt like a record of failure. It felt like something else. Not redemption, not forgiveness, but a beginning. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is walk away not because the love faded, but because the timing died. Growth demands a heavy price, and the choices made in our darkest storms echo for a lifetime. If you've ever had to leave a piece of your heart in the past to build a better future, share your story in the comments. We read every single one. At Soul Stirring Stories, we explore the complex, beautifully messy reality of being human. If you appreciate stories that leave you thinking, please subscribe and join our community. Remember, it is never too late to start a new page.